Yeah, so hi, I'm Phil. I wrote this paper as a master's thesis for the Georgia Tech HCI program. I worked together with Neha, Kumar, and this is my first ever conference talk, so forgive any slip-ups. So to begin with, first I'd like to give a shout out to my mom, who flew from New York to see me give my talk. So hi, Mom. She's in the middle. All right, so to give a background on emojis first as a whole, emojis were first created in 1999 by this company called Entity Docomo, basically like an AT&T in Japan, that was trying to meet the rising demand for image-based messaging. And basically the original set was 176 12 by 12 pixels, and they were designed to meet like what you would talk about in your daily lives. So this is what this is the 176 original set. These, I think, were hanging in the MoMA at one point, too. And you can see already that there's, symbols like weather, hand gestures, and like emotions like heartbreak and smiley faces, frowny faces, stuff that still perseveres in emojis now. And how did emojis get from Japan to the West? Well, they came through the iOS keyboard. So Apple, trying to break into the Japanese market, actually enabled emojis on their keyboard. And if you downloaded a Japanese app, you would get the keyboard on your phone, and it went viral, and people just started downloading Japanese apps to get the keyboard. And then eventually they got so popular, they were encoded into the Unicode standard in 2010. This is like the standard of all text rendering across any platform. So that's how they got onto like your Android phone and your Windows PC and whatever displays emoji nowadays. So how about emojis today? Well, we have a lot more than 176. There's 2,666 at time of writing. Actually, there's a bit more because there were new emojis launched since my paper. But I want to take a look at how these emojis are kind of divided along a country lens. So if we look at Japan, since they were first, they have the most. They have 94 emojis, which is about 4% of the total. And so you can see them represented here. And some of you might be going like, I don't think some of these emojis are Japanese. Well, fun fact. So this Moai statue is actually a reference to like a Moai statue that's in Shibuya, which is like a popular train station to meet. So teenagers would text, hey, come meet me at this Moai statue head. And that's why it exists today and why it's like a Japanese emoji. Another example is the smiling poop, which is actually a common visual reference in Japanese media. This is like from the 80s Japanese manga Dr. Slump. So the smiling poop is also Japanese. It has like a core part of their pop culture. And so how about the rest of the countries? So after Japan is America, has about 32 emojis. Not surprising because the Unicode Consortium is based in America. Following is UK with 6. Following that is China also with 6. And then France and Mexico tied about 2. And again, there have been some more emojis released since then, so these numbers have shifted a little bit, but not really by much. All right, so what is the problem here? Well, in the 21st century, emojis kind of act as a universal language for messaging. It's on everyone's keyboard. But the current set covers a pretty limited part of the world. So it's really good at covering Japan. Japan is also the only country with a map emoji of itself. It's pretty good at covering, like, America, the Western world, but not so good at covering like here or here, so Asia, Europe. So our research question, does the current emoji set possess a cultural gap from the perspective of the global population using it? And then if so, what emojis could be created to kind of like address or close this gap while ensuring they aren't too obscure or misunderstood by the global populace? Because if you're going to put something on everyone's keyboard, you need to like have the right mix of popularity, but not be too popular because then you're just going to end up with Western pop culture references, so there's kind of a tightrope that we have to figure out. All right, so how do we go about doing this? Oh, and culture here refers just to countries, by the way, not like any other aspects of culture. So just think of it like a geopolitical definition. So the methods, they had 4 methods: an online survey, semi-structured interviews, participatory design exercise, and participant observation. And we did all these methods because we wanted to capture the different facets of emojis. So we wanted to capture how people use emojis in general. We wanted to capture like a deep dive into like just beyond the survey, going into the interviews, like why do you use emojis this way? When do you use emojis? What motivates you? What types of emojis you're using? And the participatory design exercise was kind of to get like a bottom-up method of designing emojis, because right now they kind of come from the top down from this Unicode Consortium. And the participant observation was actually sitting in one of those meetings where they discussed the new emojis coming out for 2020. So kind of getting like the bottom-up and the top-down view. All right, so in total, in this research, 45 countries were represented, as in they participated in one thing or another, someone from a country. To begin with, the surveys, distribute it online through social media like Facebook, Slack, Reddit, those types of things. And they focused on, first, where did these participants grow up, and also what their ethnicities are, because those don't necessarily align. You could grow up in America but be very like Japanese in my case. There we go. So then what kind of emojis they commonly use, just to get a sense of, what are people sending to each other. And then how often are you using emojis? So like how, emojis might be on your keyboard, but are you really opening that up, or is it just more just you use it once in a while? And we had about 150 valid responses. So this is just a map of like who participated in the survey. I think this is about like 36 or so countries, just to give a sense of the scale. And so looking at some of the demographics, like this is the age distribution, skews pretty young, mostly 18 to 22 or 23 to 29. That's okay, because prior research has found that older people use emojis and emoticons similar to younger people, so there's not really a difference in how you use these things, no matter on age. And then in terms of emoji usage, this is a kind of confusing graph, because it's like percentages and percentages, but basically it's saying like how often you're sending emojis, and the cusp of it is like 60% of people, 1 in 5 messages or greater contain an emoji. So like more than half of people are sending emoji 20% of the time. And finally, another thing that we found is that like 70% of people have tried searching for an emoji that didn't exist. So people are searching for things that don't pop up. So there's some aspect of a gap. All right, so our next thing was to actually conduct some semi-structured interviews with some of these survey participants. We asked them if they were interested. So we had 2 sets of questions. One was like understanding their emoji usage patterns, because kind of diving deep on those questions of like who you use emoji with, why are you sending them, what motivates you, stuff like that. Second set was focused on understanding the key facets to their culture. So basically, we don't want to say outright, "Yo, what do you think would be an emoji?" We want to be like, "All right, tell me about your country's fashion, your country's food, your country's landmarks," and taking that and taking into account other design considerations down the road, it will help us decide what emojis we might want to start trying out. So this had 17 participants with 16 countries. These are the 16 countries that were interviewed. And at the end of the interview, we actually had participants draw for 6 categories from their culture. So the categories were kind of loosely based on the Unicode Consortium's definition. They divide up the emojis by a category. So the drawings provided a visual representation of what was discussed in our interviews to help guide the design later down the road. And also it pushed participants to narrow down core elements of their culture. So we talked for an hour or 2, and it's like, all right, how can you distill that down to 6 things? So here's some of the drawings that were created. You can see, for example, the left middle is by a Korean, and they drew bibimbap as their food. The right middle upper one is a Serbian, and he drew this famous horse statue in Serbia. Don't know what it is, though. Can't quote me on it. And then we had a participatory design exercise. So all the exercises up to this point had been very, inflective of what I believe is my important part of my culture, or what I think about when I think about my own culture. So the purpose of this was to contrast what participants pictured about their own culture and get an outside perspective, right? So what does an American think about Korea? What pops into their head? And this is important because when that emoji keyboard is on your thing, you're seeing basically another culture, and it's do you understand that that's part of that culture? So for this, we had 9 participants, 7 countries represented, and here are the 7. And it was basically a 1-hour-long exercise. And the first half, participants drew their own flag, so I had a sheet of paper with a flag, and you just colored it in. It was very artsy. And then you just drew related to cultural touchstones underneath of what you associated with your own culture. In the second half, participants drew their flag on a whiteboard, and then I gave everyone sticky notes and was all right, now everyone put sticky notes under not your country. So here's an example. Those 2 on the left are the sheets of paper that individuals filled out. On the right, you can see people in South Korea and Kenya, and South Korea, for example, I think had K-pop underneath it, bibimbap, common foods that other people know about. And then finally, our last method was our participant observation. So observing and experiencing the actual emoji decision-making process at the Unicode Consortium, who are the ones who decide, and they meet every quarter. So I sat on a meeting that discussed the potential emojis for 13.0, which are set to release next year. And most of the room was pretty much older veterans of the white tech industry, older guys 60, 50, not a lot of diversity. And then, so for example, they were discussing this new pickup truck emoji, which I think got approved. So if you want to use the pickup truck emoji in 2020, look forward to that. But they were asking, does the concept of a pickup truck translate to the United Kingdom? Do they call it a pickup truck? And they were like, yeah, maybe. And that was it. They didn't care about any other country except the UK. They were just worried about the English-speaking countries. So not a good look. And here's my Instagram story from being at the meeting, just to prove I was there. And so findings. So the findings kind of bucketed into three themes: communication within and across cultures, expressing culture, and cultural indulgence. And I'll get into all of these right now. So for communicating across and within cultures, so this was like a quote I picked out. Pineapple pizza. My partner and I use pineapple pizza as a way of saying I love you. And this reflects, similar research, which has found that people take emojis and redefine their own meaning to it. So, people will use emojis for a joke. So there was one that was I'm in a group with a bunch of scientists, and we use a scientist emoji whenever someone says something dumb as an ironic joke. Yeah. And then another common motivation was to clarify the tone of a message. So you make sure you're not coming off too strong or too harsh, depending on the emoji can definitely shift your tone. And finally, there was also this thing that emerged was a spectrum of how you send emojis. So when you first meet someone, you're not really emojiing it off the bat. As you get closer, you might start doing some abbreviations or emoticons, and then emojis fall into that bucket of friends and lovers. And then in the family case, you'll still use emojis, but you'll be more polite. You're not going to abbreviate everything. So this was a general sense. It's not super accurate, and it was something novel, so it could definitely be looked at further. In terms of expressing culture, I figured this quote was applicable since we're in Scotland. American and British flag emojis for patriotic things relevant to us or Scotland. So people use it to be patriotic, obviously. About 1 in 5 self-reported in the survey saying that they used a culturally situated emoji, but actually looking at what their recent emojis were, it was more 1 in 3. People didn't think sushi or taco was considered a cultural emoji, so maybe that shows how all food is maybe bucketed into something else. And 42% in the survey thought there was something in their native language that could be represented as emoji. And again, 70% had felt that they couldn't find what they were looking for. And the final theme that came out is this idea of you are what you eat. So the most common discussion topic whenever we asked anything about their culture was food. 1/3 of the participants who suggested emojis in the survey were all talking about food. 1/3 of the Post-it notes that were put up were all about food. So there's this study called food science. It's an academic research area which is pretty much dedicated to examining how food is one of the primary mechanisms of communicating culture and embracing your own culture. So just reflecting that analogous field as well. All right, so finally on to design and evaluation. So, we got all this info. It was time to design some emojis that might help fill that gap we found. All right, so I made 40 emojis. And they were, informed from the interviews and the drawings we had from the participatory design exercise. And again, emojis were mostly covering food because that's what people talked about. Closely following was landmarks and fashion, which are also easy to visually represent because in the end of the day, this has to go on a keyboard and you have to understand what it is from a glance. And so how do we evaluate this? Well, what we did was we took 5 existing emojis. These are 5 emojis that are on a keyboard right now. And they're all from Japan because we felt that selecting a US-based emoji would be they're too global, so it's too easy to understand. We thought Japanese emojis would provide a better benchmark of how does it compare to other cultures. So the evaluation was a survey distributed online. We asked, what does the emoji represent? What is the country of origin? Which emoji category would it belong to? And then we had each participant got 12 emojis, 4 from the control, 8 from the random, 8 from the test, randomly distributed. Every emoji was served about 30 times, so there was nothing overrepresented or underrepresented. 128 valid responses. And so this is how they stacked up. Basically, everything on the left of the swirly Naruto maki did better than all the emojis, and you can see how they kind of divide down. But you can see that, so that's about half of the emojis I made up did better than current existing emojis on your keyboard. So takeaways. First, an emoji imbalance, and a lack of transparency, and a difficult and painful process. So to dive into these, the emoji imbalance, discussing there's already existing cultural emojis which overall comprehension is low. As you saw in that graph, 20 emojis of mine did better than those real ones. So it kind of faces that, emojis could go beyond a Western or Japanese focus to be more culturally representative, and there's no harm in that they're going to be too obscure or anything. The emoji process is not transparent. So most of the time we talk to people, they were like, all right, what are you going to do with these emoji tags? Are you going to take it to Apple or Google or whatever? So everyone thinks like you take it to the company is the one who decides the emojis, but really there's a standards board, but nobody knows about them. They're like operating in the shadows. So yeah, and they have like public discussions on these emojis, but they reach like a max of 25 participants and can sometimes it's used 3 or 0. Like this is going to be on a billion keyboards, but only 25 people really put their input from the public. So the submission and discussion process could evolve to be more democratic. And then if you know how to submit, it's even harder because you have to write like a 10 to 15-page paper about why this should be an emoji. They have all these guides and statistics you need to pull up. And, you know, it's not accessible to those who don't speak English or aren't graphic designers because you have to design the thing you submit. So there could be an easier method of submission that could generate larger volume and provide location data to parse. So this is an example of like maybe you search for an emoji and it says it's not there, but would you like to like pull out a quick form, and then they have the data of like where it was requested from, who requested it, what language. Just one idea. So conclusions. We investigated this emoji gap. We designed and evaluated emojis to address that gap. And then we proposed how, you know, the Unicode Consortium can take steps to involve the public. And in terms of future work, we can tackle specific countries or underrepresented populations for emojis. This is kind of taking a wide swath, but you could look at a specific nation, or you could look at one thing that Apple is doing is looking at disability emojis, for example, so a different type of culture. You can investigate the relationship between emojis and intimacy, which was something that I showed in that graph, but we didn't really dig into. It wasn't the focus on this paper. Design a better emoji submission system, so making it more accessible and open to everyone around the world. Propose more representative emojis. So anyone can propose an emoji, so if you have an idea, you can write it up right now. It's just going to take a while, and it's going to be very annoying to write, but you can do it. And then finally, push for greater diversity within the Unicode Consortium. So if your company is on the board, which is mostly the big tech giants like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and whatsoever, you know, argue that, you know, there should be maybe you can participate or have a coworker participate and, you know, evaluate these emoji proposals. I do it because now I work at Facebook, so I'm involved in that. And that's a wrap. Thank you.
Sorry guys, we have a lot of people standing. I was wondering if you could please just shift in so that they can fill up the aisle seats. Thank you.
And also, like, if you have questions, can you please use this mic? And otherwise, you can write your question and or try to speak it a little bit louder, and we can repeat it in the mic. Questions?
No. Cool. Well, I'll be around after.
I'll just ask one question. So I wanted to understand, like, if people want to engage with the UC consortium, like, what would be the ways to do it? And that was the part, like, which I wanted to know a little bit more details.
So, like, the best current way is basically write a proposal, because you can call in and, like, they'll want you to call in to, like, discuss what your actual emoji proposal is. So that's, like, the current avenue. It's definitely not the best. So it's very much like a top-down thing that has to, you know, be petitioned maybe from the bottom up about how this can become more inclusive of diverse voices and just people in general.
There is one question there.
Yeah, so it seems that it's hard to push for cultural diversity when the board is not culturally diverse.
Yeah.
Is there a way to push for diversity within the board?
Yeah, so like that's what me and a couple of coworkers at Facebook are doing, for example. Like our representative is like an Asian American woman. So like it's up to like each company that like pays like $100,000 to get on this board or some ridiculous amount of money. So there's that barrier of the monetary compensation they're looking for. So yeah, it definitely has to be something that starts within, but maybe outside pressure can help.
So I just had a quick question. So it's Gareth Tigwell. I'm the University of Dundee. So I've looked at a little bit of emojis before in the past, and so there's a lot of like miscommunication between emojis. Yeah. And I think what you're doing is really interesting, and like increasing the number of culturally relevant emojis is great. Do you plan to look more at the potential misunderstandings that can occur from these different emojis that are maybe more specific to different cultures and to people that might not know the meaning behind some of these?
Do you mean like the ones I've made?
I
Or the ones that
guess.
exist today?
Yeah, I guess it's more like where you're heading in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you introduce these more cultural specific emojis.
Yeah, it would be something valuable to look forward to, I think. It's hard, though, because like, how do you test an emoji before it is an emoji? It's like that kind of like, you would have to render two platforms. That's the most common issue of miscommunication is like Apple and Google emojis look different. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, then I would have to make like an Apple style and a Google style of all those and test like texting them or something. So it's a little bit more involved than what I proposed right now.
Cool. Cool, thank you.
Cool.